Hello, I'm David Balcano, Honorary President of the Society of Clinical Research Sites. I'm here speaking to you today on behalf of the SCRS Leadership Council about a concern we were on the right path for, but seems to be creeping back this year. Yes, it seems that a few sponsors and CROs are starting to try to extend site payments to quarterly instead of monthly, as well as holding back a percentage of the payments the site earned until the end of the study. And some sites are caving to the pressure to let them. I say that last part because a good colleague from a sponsor once told me, why do sponsors pay sites quarterly and hold back money? Because the sites let them. Now, this is not everybody. Many sponsors and CROs come out the gate offering timely and full resources for the site to do their studies, and we thank them. Some offer suboptimal payment terms, but the sites know that they ask once, twice, sometimes three times to get the right payment terms. Now, this delays contracting a startup, but at least they do come around. For anyone, sponsors, CROs, or even sites that think quarterly payments or holdbacks are a good idea, this video is for you to help you make the most educated business choice in the matter. So let's take a typical budget where the parties agree to the fair market value of the visits. All looks good until you see the payment terms in the CTA. Payments for the study visits will be paid on a quarterly basis, less 10% of which will be withheld and paid with the final payment. Now, what does quarterly payments mean? Instead of the site being paid monthly, where the visits done in April are paid in May, the visits done in May are paid in June, and the visits done in June are paid in July, on a quarterly schedule, the site has to do the visits in April, and then the visits in May, and then the visits in June, and then wait through July, and then wait through August, and through September until the very end of the next quarter when they are finally paid. Now, this means instead of being paid at an average of 45 days, their accounts receivable is 137 days. That's 90 days longer wait for the money than if paid monthly. Now, some may say, oh, no, we pay sooner, like 45 days after the quarter ends. But regardless, it's not the normal cadence of monthly payments, and the site remains waiting longer than they should to receive their payments. Now, what is a holdback? That's when the site is paid whenever they're paid, but only paid a portion of the money that the site earned. In this case, it's 90%. Then, the site has to wait all the way until the study's completely over before they're paid the rest of the money that they earned many years ago. Now, some may say, oh, no, we cap the holdbacks at a certain number. But that still does not distract from the fact that the work and the data that the site and the study participants deliver to the sponsor or CRO today will take many years before their full payment arrives. So back to our example. Under these payment terms, the site will get 90% of their payment, not monthly, but once every 3 months, and the remaining 10% after the study is over. Now, as mentioned, most sponsors and CROs come out the gate agreeing to pay the sites on time and in full, but we hear the few that are testing out if the sites will allow them to push these kinds of payments terms onto them instead. We're not sure why, but we know it's not uncommon when businesses are expecting uncertain financial times. The temptation to hold on to cash is very real. In this example, this is a publicly traded company on the U.S. stock market that must disclose its accounting policies in its SEC filings. This company states, and I rearranged the words a little bit to protect their identity, cash and cash equivalents and restricted cash are invested in short-term demand deposits and money market funds. Restricted cash consists of funds allocated for future payments resulting from contractual obligations. So this is fancy accounting talk that means that the money earned is in the sponsor or CRO's bank earning them interest. Now, in all fairness to them, this accounting policy is not different than any other companies, public or private, including the sites themselves. But let's look at the impact piece by piece. So let's start with quarterly payments. Now, because of the holdback, which we'll talk about later, the payment for the first visit won't be $52.47, but only $47.22, which when put into bank instead of paying the site is called the principal that earns the interest. The average interest rate for a money market account based on my research was 0.59% annual. It's shifting from a monthly payments to payments only every 3 months, we saw earlier adds about 90 accounts payable days. But depending on a few variables, such as when the interest is paid and earned, let's put a buffer in there, be conservative, and say the money's only earned just for 60 days. Using a simple interest formula, principal times rate times time, you see that the interest earned on the first visit is $4.58. So if we take that formula for the first visit, apply it to each visit's payment, we get a total of $36.46 interest earned for each participant. Doesn't seem like much, but this is a big study. And with the site's target of 500 participants, we get a grand total of over $18,000 the sponsor or CRO makes in interest by doling out the money the site earned quarterly instead of monthly. Now let's look at the holdbacks. In this case, the 10% held for the years until the study's over will be the principal amount. Here's that 10% along with the number of weeks from the visit, 158 being the longest, plus a very generous estimate of only 8 weeks after last patient last visit to have the final payment issued. We're sure it will take longer, but we'll go with 8 weeks. But wait, this is if all 500 participants are recruited on the same day, which won't happen. This is a 3-year study and will have a 2-year recruitment period. Thus, some of the money held back from the site will be earning the sponsor or CRO interest for a little over 5 years before they pay the principal to the site. But let's not get too complex and just average it out for the sake of the example. Now, in the previous example, when time was relatively short, we can use a simple interest formula of principal times rate times time, but that won't give a good estimate here because of the length of time. To get a more proper estimate, we have to factor in the concept of compound interest, which means that it's not only the principal earning interest, but the periodic interest payments are also earning interest. To calculate this, you take the present value of the site's principal and still factor in interest rate per period and the number of periods to get the future value, but in a much more complicated formula. But instead of teaching you all math, there's a lot of internet calculators that can do this for you, as well as good old Excel having a plug-in formula. So in our case, you take the site's principal present value of $524.70, factor in the interest rate of 0.59% per year, level out the number of years before the site's principal is paid, and in the Excel formula, you have to eliminate the remaining variables as they don't apply here. Specifically, the sites are not getting interim payments, so that's left blank, and that type variable is just a little too complicated, for example. But you plug into this in Excel, and you get what the money will be worth in the future, essentially an interest gain of $13.10. Take that formula for that first visit, apply it to the rest, and we get $71.42 interest earned for each participant from the holdbacks. Times our 500 participants equals over $35,000 of interest the sponsor or CRO earned from holding back 10% of the site's money until the end of the study. To sum it up, we take the $18,000 and change from the quarterly payments plus the $35,000 and change from the holdbacks yields nearly $54,000 of estimated interest earned from delaying this one site's payments. Now, this is one site. There are multiple sites in the study. And of course, this is at a very safe interest rate in a conservative bank. Some banks are offering up to 4% or more on their money market accounts, which makes this number even more tempting for a sponsor or CRO to engage in this behavior, especially if they feel short-term economic uncertainty. Getting back to what my colleague told me, why do sponsors and CROs pay quarterly and hold back 10%? Because the sites let them. But that may have sounded a lot of finger wagging, but it's not finger wagging. This is normal business even for sites, and we don't blame anyone for earning interest on their cash in the bank. Now, with that said, some may say that this is the site's money, they earned it, and it's not fair for the sponsor or CRO to keep the interest they earned off the site's earned money, and that earned interest should be paid to the site. But if we were all in the financial banking business, our arguments may end there, but we're not. All of us, the sponsors, the sites, the CROs, we're in the business of running studies, so in fact, I might say that the discussion's not at all about fighting over who the interest belongs to, but should be concerned about the effects this kind of financing brings on the site's study performance. Sure, the site's being made whole in the end, but the economics of study conduct is also dependent on a healthy cycle of incoming cash flow to meet or exceed the study's outgoing cash flow needs. We've seen this before. Cash flow's like breathing. It comes in and out at healthy rates. Perhaps you partaken in the breathing demonstration that I've done on stage comparing the difference between monthly site payments and quarterly site payments. Incoming cash is the oxygen that fuels studies, and straining the site's natural oxygen intake is not healthy for the sites or the studies. Try breathing this way. Now, since I'm not allowed to do a breathing exercise demonstrating the effect of 10% holdbacks, I've often given my chess example, where you want me to win the game of chess for you, but you think I need to have 10% of my power taken away during the game to incentivize me to play my best. Guess what? I'm already incentivized to win, and I could play my best game when I have all my resources, not like this. But dealing with money, perhaps my Monopoly example is more apropos. Like in Monopoly, sites have to pay all their outgoing cash flow for the study on time and in full. But when the site is getting the resources to do that, nobody would think it a good idea to do this. So I want you to go home and play Monopoly, but play the quarterly payments and holdbacks for sites way. Although you won't have this edition that has these kinds of site reality cards like this, you can still experience it with your regular game by paying everyone at the end of your turn in full, but when you are paid, the bank and all the other players only pay you every third turn and hold back 10% of what they owe you until after the game is over. Oh, and they can still use the money if they need it. You'll soon see that the extra strain that quarterly payments can bring, as well as also experience that getting that holdback money after the game is over and all boxed up, didn't help you at all in winning the game. In fact, it worked against you. Now, of course, this is not a game, but real life affecting a study, a staff, a business, and patients. So the site asks that these terms be reset to normal payment terms, and here's all the usual lies and resistance.
You're the only site asking for this.
No, we're not.
We have to pay all sites the same.
No, you don't. And if you do, pay them all monthly and don't withhold anything. I'm sure they won't mind.
These are industry standard terms.
No, they're not. Industry data shows otherwise.
Our systems aren't set up for monthly payments.
Yes, they are. But if they're not, go ahead and change the system settings to monthly.
Our systems require a holdback number.
No, they don't. But if they really do, zero's a number. Put 0.
We have to have something to make sure the site does all its work to close the study.
That's what the closeout fee is for. And in this case, it was a CRO who said,
The sponsor requires these payment terms.
that's always a fun one because we've done other studies with that sponsor before, and no, they don't. But even if they do, since the CRO holds no power, we would ask, can we talk to the sponsor directly then? Now, in this case, it went to the sponsor who said they'd pay monthly and without holdbacks, so the site eventually got those terms. But it added cost and time to the negotiation, delayed the startup, and decreased trust between the site and the other parties. But what if the site didn't push back? What if the site just caved to the pressure? What impact could this possibly have had on their ability to conduct the study? So let's go back to our real-life example. As the site doesn't get to put any money in the bank to earn interest, the time value of their money is based solely on inflation and cost of living adjustments. Now, to measure the impact, we need to make an assumption on what that rate will be. The International Monetary Fund averages global inflation at 4.2% a year, ranging from 0.6% to 24.7% by region. Our example is US-based, so if we localize it, we might use the Consumer Price Index, which is a 20-year average of about 2.57%. But wait, The CPI is an aggregate of many components such as energy, clothing, groceries, and shelter. The medical services component is usually, not always, but usually higher than the average. Thus, if we take the medical services component of the CPI, that's a 20-year average of 3.24%. So let's go with that for our example. Let's look at quarterly payments first. Same concept as before. Somewhat short term, so we'll use the simple interest formula of 90% pay as your principal. The rate is a negative 3.24%. Delayed 60 days yields a loss of $25.15 on this visit due to the quarterly payment instead of monthly. So if we take that formula for week 0 and apply it to all the visits, we get a negative impact of $200.24 for each participant. Times our 500 participants gives us a little over $100,000 the site earned, but will never get solely because of being paid quarterly instead of monthly. It just vanished. Now let's look at the negative impact of holdbacks. Here's our holdback amounts and our aging as you saw before. Now, just as compounding interest works for you when you earn interest, it also works against you when you're paying interest or inflation. So similar to finding the future value of a present amount, finding the present value of a future amount is essentially the reverse. And of course, Excel has a similar calculation rubric, switching the present value and future value variables. So years from the week 0 visit, the future payment to the site will be that $524.70. Factor in our inflation estimate of 3.24% per year, averaged out to the number of annual periods to make the math easier, remove the interim payments and the type variables, and then you get a present value of that payment. So in essence, the future payment of $524.70 is only worth $473.68 in today's dollars, which means $51.54 of the 54 cents of the site's resource just simply vanished. Once again, we take that week 0 formula, apply it over the course of the study, and you get a negative impact of $243.97 per participant. Times our 500 participants yields nearly $122,000 of resources to do the study that simply vanished. But wait, it's still not accurate. Remember, this is a 2-year enrollment period, and the site will not put all the patients in on day 1. That means that the first patient first visit is not 3, but over 5 years for the site to be paid. So if you calculate an even distribution of enrollment over a 2-year period for purposes of our example, and accommodate for the payments that will take over 4 and over 5 years to be paid, that estimates study resources of nearly $169,000 that just vanished solely because 10% of the money was not paid when it was earned, but held back until after the study was over. To sum it up, we take the $100,000 and change from the quarterly payments, plus the $168,000 and change from the holdbacks, yields an estimate of nearly $269,000 of resources earned that could have used to help conduct the study, but the site not only won't see it during the study, they will never see it at all, simply because it vanished due to inflation, solely because of the payment terms. Now, a lot of this money may not vanish if you put in a cost of living adjustment in the budget. For example, the last visit payment of $16.52, even if paid on time and in full because it takes place somewhere between 3 and more than 5 years from now, is only worth about $14.52 in today's dollars. If that visit was done today and you wouldn't budget it at $14.52, then your future self will be very angry at you for budgeting it for that amount 3, 4, 5 years from now. You need to budget it at the projected future value of $18.79 to be equivalent to that $16.52 4, 5 years from now. And do that for the rest of the visits. Now, this is not a budget increase, nor is it over fair market value. Only a cost of living adjustment of today's budgeted fair market value averaged out over the length of the study. Now, SCRS has spreadsheets on their website to help you calculate these. If you're not yet proficient in Excel with present value and future value formulas, but we do encourage you to get proficient with those formulas in Excel. Another strategy is to just have a simple budget statement along the lines of, on January 1st of each calendar year, all prices will be increased 3.4% to accommodate for estimated inflation. There's many other strategies to do this. Now, while this tremendously helps stopping the money from vanishing, we still have to deal with the topic of this presentation. It's great to make the sites whole in the end, but we still need study cash flow during the study. Now, if breathing, chess, or Monopoly didn't demonstrate this enough, how you need the resources during the game, let's look at how this works in sports. In the game of hockey, the NHL average team scores about 3 goals every 60 minutes of play. This means that every 60 minutes, your team scores an average of 3 goals, but you also have the average of 3 goals scored against you in an evenly matched game. But what happens when your team has a player in the penalty box? Your team still has 6 players, but you're not fully resourced to win the game, as one of your players isn't allowed to be put into use. As a result, your team has to shift their entire game strategy to be focused much less on scoring and much more challenged to survive until you get your player back. In fact, your average scoring while shorthanded drops from 3 goals to 0.8 goals per 60 minutes of play. That's 73% less successful than if you had your full forces. To make it worse, you also give the headwinds double the chance to score against you. Why would we choose to disadvantage sites like it's in our studies? Why not give them at least an even chance? Or better, if the rules allow as many advantages as you can to improve the site's chances of study success. And just like your favorite sports team you want to win, we all want sites to win when conducting studies, but when they're strained of resources during the study, they also have to focus more on defense rather than offense, looking at alternative ways to simply survive the study, and like the high questioning or the high percentage of one and dones, questioning the value of doing clinical trials overall. Now, go ahead, pause the cartoon. It'll be available if you want it, but pause it if you need to review everything. Now, the bottom line in this example is, without a penny increase in the budget, but simply paying the site the money they earned when they earned it, this site would have had an extra $53,000 a year over the 5-year period to conduct the study. That's probably another full-time person they could use for the study. What would this site have had to have cut while conducting this sponsor's study that they didn't have to cut for others? Or more positively stated, what could the site have done if these payment terms didn't hinder them so much? But Dave, won't the numbers be smaller? This was a big study. Won't they be smaller for smaller studies? Yeah, sure. Won't inflation vary? Yes, of course it'll vary. What if the site didn't roll 500? Well, yeah, true, but what if they exceeded 500? What about different interest rates? Yes, interest rates are going to vary, but people can say, yeah, but what about this and what about that, and pick these examples apart. But the results may vary slightly, but the core concept is the same. So the ultimate question is, what is the best use of the money the site earns to continue running the study? Still sitting with the sponsor or CRO, earning interest for them, or, so as many sponsors or CROs say, the reason for holdbacks is to use as a threat to not pay for some kind of future leverage, which is weird as they can't really not pay it because the site already legally earned the money. Or put to work by the people who already earned it so that they can have the best resources available to them to continue doing the study until the very end. For those many sponsors and CROs that already come out the gate with adequate payment terms, we thank you. For those who don't, but will secretly move to inadequate payment terms only if the site asks once, twice, or 3 times, we ask you to just stop the games and come around. You're mostly hurting yourselves and you're eroding your trust with your site colleagues. For site staff that think these terms are a good idea, or maybe feel the need to cave to the pressure, contact your CFO and see if they agree. You may find that sometimes you're better off by not doing a study than by doing it. But all in all, After hearing all this, if the parties all agree that the best finances are quarterly payments and holdbacks despite these shortcomings, well, we thank you for at least considering the consequences, respect your business decision, and wish you luck. Thank you for listening, and I hope this helps you all make the most appropriate decisions to better the success of your studies without a penny's increase in the budget and paying the site only what they earned, but when they earned it and in full.